Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Today is the 13th anniversary of the unsolved disappearance of Madeleine McCann from the apartment 5A in the Ocean Club Hotel in Praia da Luz, Portugal. It happened on the 3rd of May, the night of the 3rd of May 2007, 13 years ago today. Last year, this time last year, I travelled to Portugal to be in Portugal on the 3rd of May 2019, and I was there to kind of do a experiment. There were a lot of other things I wanted to find out as well, but I wanted to check the time it would take to get from the door of the apartment, the front door, the wooden door, to a disposal site I'd identified via the Smith sighting, and then also to calculate how quickly it would take to get back from that point, not to the door again, but to the tapas bar. What was really interesting about that visit to Praia da Luz wasn't really the things that I was going to investigate. It was a lot of other things that kind of sneaked up on me, a lot of other insights that snuck up on me that I didn't expect. One of them was, while I was parked in a car, sitting in the car, really just watching what time the sun went down around the complex, and then also checking what time it was sort of dark, what time the heaviest sort of darkness really fell, when it wouldn't get darker than that. And so an example of that was, while I was parked in the car, I actually heard someone close their shutters very, very clearly. I mean, it was very clear to hear the shutters. And it was, I think, on the second or third floor above the McCann's ex-apartment. And of course, in this abduction, in inverted commas, scenario, apparently the shutters were open from the outside, right? And not only that, Gerry also said that he later pulled the shutters back down. So that was something that I didn't really expect, is to find out or to kind of get an impromptu audio test, like a sound test, on just how clearly you could hear the shutters opening and closing. Obviously I had the same experience where I was staying in my little accommodation. I had the same thing, and so in the book that I've written and had put up audio book on Patreon, it's on the $5 tier. I talk about, for example, the shutters and how that plays into the circumstances of the abduction in the McCann case. The other interesting thing was, 12 years ago last year, looking at the media narrative in Portugal and just seeing what they were talking about. And of course, every year there's either the identification of a new suspect, right at the time of the anniversary, you'll sort of have a new suspect coming along. And this year was a little bit different. This year the McCanns basically have been a little bit out of sight, but they did release a statement, and it's kind of ironic. They say, fear, worry and isolation, emotions that we dreaded Madeleine experiencing and which haunted us for a long time and still do on occasions, right? The McCanns are linking the coronavirus pandemic, specifically the fear and loneliness associated with it, with what happened to their daughter. The irony, of course, is that they left all three children alone to dine with their friends, and not just on the night Madeleine disappeared, but all the other days that they were on holiday.
Now, was Madeleine upset the night before about being left alone? Had she had a moment and got out of bed and started crying and started looking for it?
I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too much. I mean, I don't know if you saw the documentary last night, so I mean, I have talked about it. Madeleine made a comment in passing that, where were you when I cried? Not just to Mummy, by the way, just generally. It just seemed a bit odd. I mean, it was a very kind of passing remark, and we just thought she doesn't usually wake up, and she woke up, that means that, you know, she must have fallen back asleep very quickly, and then she moved on. You know, she moved on.
Anybody with young children will understand that children cry, they wake up at night. During that week, there was one night, and we can't give too much detail because it's part of the investigation.
So on the morning of Madeleine's disappearance, the very same morning, Madeleine was overheard saying to her parents, "Why didn't you come last night when we were crying?" And I don't know if you need to be a rocket scientist to know this, but the answer is, why didn't you come? Well, because they weren't there. They were somewhere else. And an upstairs neighbor also overheard Madeleine crying alone in the apartment. Of course, she wasn't alone. Sean, I think, was with her as well, and Sean was also crying. And they apparently cried for over an hour while the parents were somewhere else, whining and dining, I think, at the tapas restaurant. It rings a little hollow in this context, doesn't it? Fear, worry, and isolation, emotions that we dreaded Madeleine experiencing. Something else that was quite interesting when I was in Praia da Luz, I was obviously a media person, a journalist, investigative reporter, a photographer, you know, documenting the scene, and I was sort of wondering whether there was any other media. And some people told me that there were reporters at one point. The only reporter I encountered firsthand was Martin Brunt, and what was quite funny was he was standing in front of the ex-apartment of the McCanns, and you know, what was quite funny was he was sort of wearing a suit or a jacket and a collared shirt, but obviously if you were standing there as a member of the public, you could actually see what was going on below the belt. And what was going on below the belt was he was sort of, you know, from the waist up, he was dressed for a Sky News live broadcast, but from the waist down he was dressed for the beach. He had looked like swimming trunks on and sandals and sort of short pants, and it was just quite funny seeing that. But there was also something for me that just reminded me of the media, is that the two sides of the media presenting a particular narrative. And while I was standing there, some other people sort of walked down and also stopped to listen to what he was saying, and you could hear him saying something about the McCanns are full of hope and they believe Madeleine is still alive, and there's no evidence, blah blah blah. Basically all the rhetoric that we come to expect both from the McCanns and from the sycophantic media. And so 13 years later, where do we stand? If we go through so many of the headlines over the years, what you know is not the truth. British police think she's still alive. MADDIE cops closing on new suspect. McCanns are hiding a big secret. She died by accident in the flat. Blood on the wall in MADDIE bedroom. I mean, what is the truth? And what was quite interesting, I found when I started researching deeper into darkness, one of the things I wanted to look at was what Kate and Gerry said about the shutters in particular, and also about the timing of the Tanner sighting, but also the timing of the little trip to the apartment back. I just wanted to focus on that. And so what was quite interesting is I went back to their statements. Gerry made 2 statements on the 4th and the 10th, and Kate only made 1 statement on the 4th. And then she was asked much later on to answer questions, and she wouldn't, the 48 questions. But anyway, what was really interesting was I looked at the statements, but in a little bit of a different way. And what I did was I copied the text of the statements and I pasted them on a Word document. I just counted the words of both statements. And so on the 4th of May, the day after the abduction, both Kate and Gerry's statements were both less than 2,000 words apiece. Now, more specifically, Gerry's statement was slightly longer. It was around about 1,700 words, and Kate's was slightly shorter than that, 1,600 and something words. When you copy and paste the text onto a Word document, it amounts to just over 2.5 pages. Let me just put that into perspective. Your daughter's been abducted, you believe, and you go to the police, and the full total of what you say to the police amounts to less than 3 pages of a Word document. Now, I've been in true crime for quite a while. I've looked at the Ramsey statements. I've looked at, obviously, the extremely lengthy interrogation of, for example, Chris Watts. But anyway, many other cases, and it goes on for pages and pages and pages. We also know that Kate McCann wrote a book. We also know there have been plenty of documentaries, and lots has been said, and the McCanns have been interviewed many times. There's this most expensive missing person search in human history for Madeleine McCann, which is ongoing. There's also the most expensive media coverage of a missing persons case in modern media history, right? And against that background, you have a situation where both parents individually give statements to the police, their official first statements, and they are like less than 2.5 pages of a Word document. And if you have time, I'll put a link to those statements in the PJ file. You can go and read them yourself and get basically the vague veneer. These really vague statements. I went in this door or whatever. And the other thing is, even in Kate's statement, she says, don't ask me about what Jane Tanner said, ask her. So it's like, in your statement to the police, you're saying, well, maybe you should speak to that other person. Now think about the brevity by both parents in their statements to the police, and then the massive amounts of media statements and the many times that the McCanns addressed the media with press releases and with celebrating 50 days and 100 days and so on. And yet, when they had their chance to speak to the media and say, please find our daughter, it amounts to 2.5 pages. The other thing that I want to focus on in this particular episode is the last photo. And I want to address 2 aspects. The one aspect I want to address is a problem with the last photo, but then also, what is the fuss about the last photo? I mean, when we say there's something wrong with the last photo, what are we actually talking about? So the first thing I want to mention, and I want to tip my hat to the Netflix documentary, because I wouldn't have seen this, I don't think, without that footage, but you basically see an image of Kate McCann from behind, and she's kind of got a little almost shrine to Madeleine. It's kind of a computer console, and right around the computer are photos of Madeleine, right? And I just want to refer you to a photo of Madeleine in the church. And this is also taken from the Netflix documentary. So it's a picture of Madeleine inside the church in Praia de Luz. And it's basically the same picture, it's the same basic scenario as the picture of Kate McCann's right shoulder. It's the picture in the bottom, at the bottom of the collage of pictures on the right, and it's the well-known last photo of Madeleine McCann where she's wearing that sort of white summer hat, right? Now, here's the problem. And the problem is, in the last photo, which was actually released to the media on the 24th of May, so exactly 3 weeks after Madeleine disappeared, this last photo was actually kind of given to the media and sort of distributed. Now, we can pontificate about why it took 3 weeks for this last photo to actually find its way into the media narrative. Why wasn't it provided immediately? We can also pontificate why other photos from where Madeleine looked to be 1 or 2 years, we can talk about all of that, but that's not what I want to talk about here. What I want to talk about here is, why is there a difference between this photo where you see Madeleine on her own, off Kate's right shoulder and in the church, and then the last photo that was released to the media? In other words, why is there one photo of Madeleine where there's no one sitting beside her, and there's another one where Madeleine is, you know, in the company of her family? And maybe you've got an explanation for that. Maybe you'd say, well, we only wanted a picture of just Madeleine on her own. You know, we just wanted a picture of just Madeleine. And so we purposefully photoshopped that image so that we could just have Madeleine on her own. Really? Who would do that? Like, who would take a photo of Madeleine and then Photoshop other people out of it? Why not just crop it? You don't need to Photoshop people out of it. You don't need to replace the artifacts that were in the photo, right? The edge of the elbow and her little sister beside her, and then sort of cover where that was with pieces of grass and the wall behind her. I mean, who would go to that kind of effort? And so what I think that kind of thing is pointing to is you would then say, okay, so what is the purpose of the last photo? What is it trying to say? And my answer to that is, I don't think Madeleine was in that context in which she's portrayed. In other words, in the last photo where you see Madeleine sitting next to her father and her sister, I don't think that ever happened that way. I don't think she was sitting next to her father and her sister, right? And then you say, well, why is that then engineered that way? Why is it engineered that she's sitting next to her father and sister? And then the possible answer could be, okay, so number one, this is a picture of Madeleine looking happy, right? She's smiling, she looks like she's having fun. But that's not enough. It's also important to have her smiling and having fun with other family members present immediately around her. And then you say, why would you need to do that? Or why would you need to show that? Why would you need to show the other family members beside her while she's looking happy? And the possible answer, I mean, there are many possible answers, but one possible answer is, well, couldn't it have been that besides this last photo and the need to fake possibly the last photo is the possibility that there were no photos of Madeleine from that entire holiday where she looked happy and she was with the rest of her family. And in the absence of that, there was the possibility of questions around how happy was Madeleine? Were her family around her? And I mean, that is the crux of the Madeleine McCann case, is when she disappeared, it was at a time when the family were separated from one another. And it wasn't a singular event. The separation where the parents went to dinner and the children were somewhere else, number one, that didn't just happen on May 3rd, it happened throughout the week. And not only that, the other members of the Topper 7 were doing the same thing. So it is a legitimate question to say, is the point of this last photo to show the family together? And is the effort they've gone to show the family together because actually they weren't really together that much? They were always either playing tennis or jogging or going to the beach or doing something, but the parents were somewhere and the children are somewhere else. That is the issue that arises out of the last photo. Now, for those interested in a sort of meticulously researched narrative dealing with a sort of more scientific side of things, I guess the true crime rocket science side of things, I've written a narrative, Deeper into Darkness. It's called Madeleine McCann, Deeper into Darkness. And when I went to Praia de Luz, I went to do some calculations. As I said, I went to check certain distances, and in the very first chapter of the audiobook, which is available on Patreon under the $5 tier, I provided the audio. Now, obviously, in the book there are links to images all along the route that I took, but in the video you can actually see those images sync to the narrative, sync to the timeline of the narrative. And the all-important issue was the timing. At what time do you depart from that front door of apartment 5A? In other words, because when you ask that question, you're asking essentially, at what exact time was Madeleine abducted? How far was she carried? Where was she carried to? And what route did the abducted take back from that point? And where did he go back from that point? And what's quite interesting is on May 3rd last year, I did this experiment at the time, so it was at night. I photographed my watch when I did the experiment. I put on my GPS locator on my watch, which measured the exact distances. And what's quite interesting was when I returned to a particular point, I'm not going to say exactly where, in this experiment, guess who was standing there? This is on May 3rd, after 10 o'clock at night, somewhere quite close to the Ocean Club. And guess who was standing there during this experiment, trying to recreate a particular aspect of Madeleine's abduction? You know who was standing there? Martin Brunt. Other aspects that I cover in Deeper into Darkness are the disposal route and the disposal site, and also various tunnels and drains in the area of the kind of Smithman route, and also towards the villa where the McCann stayed in the last 2-3 weeks, well, in the 2-3 weeks following the abduction. So I guess in the last 2-3 months that they lived in Praia de Luz before they left Praia de Luz for Britain in early September, when they were made official Arguidos. Also coming soon on the Patreon channel, this is for fans of the Watts case, is a series on the Watts tapes dealing with the FBI interview with James Coder. But for the rest of you, if you're interested in the Madeleine McCann case, I'll be covering it in further detail on this channel. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.